every time I would go visit Leopoldo, much like my brother, he was like, I think you're a supervillain. And he goes, and I write supervillains. So like, I think you're a supervillain. I'm like, no, I'm not.
So talk to me about the journey from being a writer, director, filmmaker, futurist, consultant, speaker, and then all of a sudden self-help guru. Because I mean, essentially with the new book, The Future You,
yeah.
it is a self-help book.
Oh yeah, very much, unabashedly so. So how that happened, and it's a really specific story. So I have a really dear friend by the name of Leopoldo Gut. Leopoldo is this amazing...
Hello, Leopoldo.
He's amazing. Amazing artist. He's from Mexico City. Amazing artist. He's this accomplished producer, has done tons of different things. Look him up, amazing writer. And he's nuts. I love him as any sort of mad artist that you've ever met. He now lives in Manhattan. He's got a huge studio in Manhattan. You go to it and it's like you're in a movie when you show up and you meet all these amazing people. It really is like, this is not real life. And then he would be like, well, tell me about what you're working on. So it's like, oh, and then you realize the words that come out of your mouth. I was like, oh, well, I'm working on a project for NATO where we're looking at the intersection between emerging disruptive technologies and weapons of mass destruction. So we'd always go out, we'd have a drink, we'd have dinner, and he was just fascinated by it. And he would use it, and he would kind of pull me into some of his work that he was doing. And he's just a great guy. And at one point he turned around to me, he's like, you need to write a self-help book. And I said, you're crazy, but we know that you're crazy. So you're crazy. And he's like, yeah, I know. But you do all of this work for large corporations, for governments and militaries and all that. Why wouldn't you do it for average people? And he goes, stop. He goes, because you care about average people. Because when anybody asks you to talk to them about the future, you do, and you stop and you take it really serious. Like you really pause. Like when people ask you, what should their kids do? Or what should their next career be? He's like, I've seen you do it. Like you do it with absolute strangers. Like, well, yeah, I do. Because I'm a futurist. That's like my job and who I am. And he's like, why wouldn't you write a book? And I was like, you're crazy. I'm leaving. So left. He did this he wore me down to the point, because when I was giving a public lecture at a university and a young woman came up to me and asked me about how to get engineering and what she could do. And I would never be so arrogant as to tell her her life. I don't know her life at all. I said, but here's how I think about it as a futurist. And then the penny dropped. I was like, oh. I could actually create an architecture for people to go, I don't know your future. I would never tell you your future. If anybody tells you your future, close the door on them. Like, don't do that. But here's how I think about it. And so I embarked on this journey, this project called The Future You, which was an experience in terror. Every single chapter was an experience in terror because who am I? I'm a middle-aged futurist white dude. Like, who am I to tell anybody about their future? But I would keep kind of coaching myself from what Leopoldo said. And then in the book, there's lots of stories from people of being able to kind of help them with their future, and was able to kind of put it together. And then, it came out in 2020, and, a lot of bad stuff happened in 2020.
Great timing.
Yeah. But fine. But yeah. Chapter 7 in the book is actually about existential crisis. It's about war, plague, all of those sort of things, like things you don't have control over. And so my publisher called me, HarperCollins, they're amazing. They called me, my publisher's like, hey man, you wrote a book about the pandemic before the pandemic. And so we had people started reading the book. Now I didn't talk about COVID, I didn't talk about that, but that idea of something that is so much bigger that you don't have control over. And how do you center yourself and find your power and find your agency when you live in a world where you don't have control over what's going on around you? And there's really amazing interviews with people like Douglas Rushkoff, who's this amazing futurist who won't call himself a futurist, but great guy who does work with people who are completely down and out. Lots of other futurists who I've met who have really done amazing work and who literally physically live on the edge of death because of a genetic condition that they have. But how do you as a futurist live on the edge of death? And so I had these people give me these amazing stories as a way to go through and do it. So that's what kind of got me there. And the thing that's just been amazing from it was now the people who reach out to me. I love it. Like, again, I spend my days doing all this futures work, and I have people who send me pictures. Because in the book, because I'm a professor, in the book there's workbooks, and there's like, you need to do the work. You got to write it down.
Yep.
And like, I have people send me pictures of their workbook. And then I actually had somebody send me a picture on Twitter because it was about, there's a chapter on housing and real estate. Like, what do I know about housing and real estate? But like housing and real estate, how do you find your future home? What does that look like? Some really fun stories about this biologist that I did some work with. And they filled that out. And then they took a picture of their house in rural Colorado. And they're like, we did it. We moved. Which on one level freaks me out. That is freaky. No, don't do that. But then it's so heartwarming because they're so happy. And they're like, no, this allowed us to do that. And for me, there's no ego in that. I feel so humble. I'm like, wow, that actually happened. And it's really cool. And they're way into it. And so that was the thing. It was terrifying doing it. And I only have Leopoldo to thank. And it's been fascinating to see what comes out of it.